Okay, sensation and perception part 2. So in our last notes, we talked about that there are these senses that are created in our physical world, so hearing, sounds, light, taste, that we are aware of if we sense it, and then our brain's job is to perceive it or to make sense of it. Okay, so in our part 2 notes, we're going to go a little bit more in depth. We're going to talk about something called selective attention, more about thresholds, this idea of subliminal messages, and then more on our just noticeable difference. Okay, so the last slide that we looked at was this one right here, talking about our signal detection theory, and that these 4 things, experience, expectations, motivation, and level of fatigue, can affect whether or not we detect a sensation. All right, so we talked about our text message and our room when we're listening for it versus we're not listening for it, if we're expecting it, if it's our mom versus our best friend, and then how tired we are. All right, so sensation and perception part 2. This first one I want to talk about with selective attention. So think about selective, meaning that you are kind of choosing what you're paying attention to. There's a phenomenon out there called the cocktail party effect. And the cocktail party effect, we'll actually practice this in class this week sometime, is when you are trying to listen to someone amongst a lot of stimulation. All right, so this is not typed here. You need to write down what I'm saying. So cocktail party, imagine you're in a room talking with 40 people and you're talking with your friend, but all of a sudden you see or you hear something across the room that you hadn't noticed before, and you are able to kind of like hone in on that conversation because you heard someone mentioned, oh, I don't know, your name, or you heard someone mention like the boy's name that you like. And you can actually continue talking to the person with you and listen to the person across the room, where before you might have not been paying attention. So all of a sudden that absolute threshold is lower because you are trying to listen to a conversation across the room. So that's called the cocktail party effect, that I can be in a room full of stimulus, but I can actually like tune in to just what one person is saying. So it's in a selective attention. All right, and really you're kind of zoning everything else out. Okay, you're getting rid of everything else and just choosing to listen to. So our absolute threshold that we talked about last time is that for 50% of the time when it gets to a certain stimulation, I will sense it. Okay, now I talked about how that can change on our 4 factors, and now we're going to talk about something called subliminal stimuli. So the idea of subliminal messages. So subliminal messages really function under this this threshold idea that if I give a message that's just below my absolute threshold, that it's still getting into the brain. Okay, so when stimulus are just below one's absolute threshold, they could still be getting into their brain, but they're not aware of it. So they've been like these ideas of like subliminal messages in advertising or subliminal message during political organizations. And there's been a lot of research on subliminal messages. So what happens is like they will, well, here's one. Let me just show you. So the subliminal message here, you guys are probably too young for this, but this is the Lion King, and this is at the end when he like falls against the dust and it goes up into these patterns. And there is a lot of like controversy for Disney because you can't see it right away, but if you look for it, it spells out the word sex. So S-E-X. And they were saying that Disney was subliminally trying to like promote sex. Okay? Now, why that's called a subliminal message is I might not have noticed or saw it 50% of the time, so it's not reaching my threshold, but it's still those senses are going into my brain. What they have found with subliminal messages, let me go back here, is that they do go into your brain, but they do not influence consumptions. Okay, so if a subliminal message is like right underneath my threshold of hearing and someone is saying like Pepsi, 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 and I don't necessarily sense it, but it's still going into my brain, that it more likely will, so it might influence my next behavior, but not my buying or my consumption of products. So I'm not going to go out like a robot and go buy a Pepsi. But maybe if I was thirsty and I was going to go to the snack bar, I might be more likely to get a Pepsi. Again, it will not make me go out and buy a Pepsi if I wasn't already thinking about it. So that's that whole priming idea. Is you have to be primed or ready to already be thinking about it, and then subliminal messages have been shown to work. But if I wasn't already thirsty or going to get a soda, I would not be more likely to go get a Pepsi. Okay? So now let's talk about Weber's law, because this is the one they're talking about, the difference thresholds. So Weber's law, talking about the the physics of senses, the psychostimulus, Weber's law said to perceive as different, so between two sounds, two lights, to taste, there must be a minimum percentage different. So for instance, between light intensity, to see if one thing's brighter or not, there has to be at least an 8% difference between those brightnesses, or else I'm not going to be able to detect it. For weight, so if I have two objects and I'm like holding them like this object has to be at least 2% heavier or lighter for me to notice a difference. And then tone frequency, how loud something is, that's 0.3%. And then we have something called sensory adaptation, and then and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is when you become less sensitive because of a constant stimulation, all right? So your clothes are a perfect example of sensory adaptation. So when you first put on your clothes, you can feel them. But can you feel them all day long? Are you sensing your clothes against your body? No, because they're constantly touching them, all right? So you stop feeling it. You can feel them now because I made you think about it. But that sensory adaptation, or like when you get into a hot tub or put your hand into something really hot. It's hot at first, but if you're in there for a long time, it loses that sensitivity because you get used to it. Okay, so it's diminished sensitivity because of constant stimulation. All right, let's look at just noticeable difference with Weber's law. So this is a couple slides, and I want you to see if you can see the difference in font size. All right. So here is our just noticeable difference. Can you tell it got bigger? You probably can tell it got bigger, but until you see it all next to each other, you can't really tell that it was getting that much bigger. Okay? So this is looking at the font size is small here, bigger here. You can tell the big difference here, but when you're going slide for slide, it was probably difficult to tell the difference in font size because it was just underneath that just noticeable difference. Okay? All right, another selective attention is something called unintentional blindness. So inattentional, meaning that I'm not aware of it, blindness. And this is when you are so focused on one thing that you don't see something blatantly happen while you're paying attention to one thing. So we'll look at this video in class, but basically there's this basketball being thrown around this group of people. And people are put in front of a computer and they said, I want you to count how many times the basketball is passed. And so they're passing the basketball really fast. And in the middle of this basketball being passed, this man in a gorilla suit walks through. Okay? Pretty noticeable when you're looking at it right now. But what they found in studies was that 50% of the time when people were counting how fast the basketball was being thrown, they didn't notice the gorilla. 50% of the time, 50% of the people didn't notice that a gorilla walked through the screen because they were trying to pay attention to the basketball being passed. Okay, so inattentional. I didn't mean to, but I was blind to the fact that this change happened. Again, you are writing down what I'm saying because there's not much words here. Okay, you'll also need to know something called change blindness. So change blindness, and that's where you have change blindness is when I have two things, and so we're talking about these three situations. Okay, so first of all is change deafness. So deafness has to do, this is kind of interesting, when people are being asked to memorize words, and they have someone reading them a list, and they're focused on trying to memorize words, they can change out the person saying the words, and they don't even notice. Okay, so that's deafness. When I'm focusing on trying to remember something, I don't even notice that someone else is talking. Choice blindness, that's this situation over here. Okay, so when someone looks the same to you, you often don't notice if they've changed. So here's the situation where this guy is stopping this older man and asking him a question. And then they have some construction workers kind of walk through the two, and the guy that was asking the questions moves, and another man takes his place. And more than 50% of the time, this guy right here had no idea that the person was changed. okay? So he had no idea that the person actually changed. So that's choice blindness, all right? Now, choice blindness we'll talk about in class because that's a little bit more complicated. And this last thing with selective attention is called pop out. Now, pop out is when something is different from all the rest. So pop out would be like this guy's face. Here, let me see if I can make this bigger. Oh, I'm just drawing at him. Hold on just a second. Sorry, I want to make that picture bigger. So when I'm looking at pop out, it's that when something pops out to you because it's different from all the rest, all right? So in this situation, this guy's face would probably pop out at you because everyone else is sad and he looks like he's having a good old time, okay? So that's selective attention, is noticing differences, all right? Okay, so that last thing that we'll talk about then is my sensory adaptation. And sensory adaptation, we already talked about a little bit. That's when I get used to stimuli and then it changes or the sensations changes because it's constant. But this is an actually interesting experiment where there was this like fake contact lens put right here. And this woman was shown these pictures. So it started out with showing pictures of this face. But after a while, the eyes got tired of like it flashing in front of her. And even though it was the same stimulus, the brain saw it different. So over time, they might look something like this. So you might just get portions of the face. Same thing here. If it started with blinking with this, this triangle, this is what it might look like over time because the eye got tired of like that same stimulus, all right? So the word beer here over time flashed multiple times might just look like bee or peep. So portions are let out because it gets used to what's being flashed up. All right, and then we really have this big sensory adaptation to what is reality and what is useful. Okay, so our brain is really kind of constantly trying to take things in and figure out, is this useful, is it not? Is it real, is it not? Okay. And now that we've really talked about what sensation and perception is, we're gonna where we're going from here. Sorry, my lights just turned off. So now our next notes are gonna have to deal with the different senses that our brain has to make sense or perceive. So we're gonna have notes on vision, on audition or hearing, other senses like pain, taste, smell, and then how our brains perceptually organize the stimulus that we get. All right, have a good day and we'll see you later.